So here we are. Good day to everyone. My name is Serhiy Yaroshenko. I'm the partner at Boulders. Gentlemen, please confirm if you hear me well and you have no technical issues with the sound. And
yeah, everything is fine. Yeah.
Everything is fine.
Yeah, everything is fine.
Brilliant. So we have come together today to discuss quite a practical and quite timely and relevant topic of security guarantees that Ukraine has been promoting and developing lately throughout its peace talks with Russia. I think that, in this great time for our country, and at the same quite bright time, if one may say so, that the nation has become so well consolidated and unified, it's quite critical that we bring together preeminent experts in the field who would share their views and opinions with respect to the matter. I also want to point out, and I believe so, that the speakers' opinion expressed in this particular discussion will be their own opinion and probably will not reflect the opinions and stance of any organizations, businesses, and other affiliated entities they have affiliation with. So, to make it short, I'm pleased to introduce to you our outstanding lineup of speakers today. We're joined by Adrian Karatnycky. He's a senior advisor at KARV Communications. He's a senior fellow at Atlantic Council too. We're also joined by Andreas Umland. He's an analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Our another speaker is James Sherr. He's a senior fellow of the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute at the International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn. He's also an associate fellow and former head of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. And finally, our distinguished legal speaker is Zakhar Tropin. He is an attorney at law. He's member of the Committee on International Law at the Ukrainian Bar Association. And he's also an associate professor at Kyiv National University, Ukraine. Gentlemen, we have quite a bunch of questions to discuss, but for the sake of time that we have quite limited, I believe that we should narrow down to the very basic foundation of the security system that's been on the table for Ukraine for quite a time, since 2008, and it's been very relevant today as well. I believe we should start with NATO as an organization that's declared to be the strongest and most powerful alliance, both on the security and political fronts. I also, and then we should jump into the Ukraine's engagement with NATO, and more specifically, the currently proposed system of security guarantees. I believe that Adrian Karatnycky might leave earlier than we conclude this discussion, so I would pass the floor to Adrian to start this discussion. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, I'd like to create a broader context for the discussion, and that is that Ukraine faces the difficult choice of potentially making certain compromises about its national security future and its alliance future, or perpetuating a war for a very long time with substantial consequences for the type of society that might emerge. We all understand that the Ukrainian fighters are, brilliant, strong, courageous, and so on. But we know that over time, a society becomes more martially oriented and militarized the longer it is at war. Secondly, that the people who lead the war often then become the political leaders of the country, and necessarily that those leaders may not have the skills requisite for the rebuilding of the country. In other words, the kinds of skills that you have to win a war. So I think that what we're really talking about is how can Ukraine take advantage of the available opportunities to find a peace, to stabilize a peace. In the short term, I think that it will require a de facto victory on the field of battle. I don't believe that Mr. Putin is interested in suing for peace. I don't believe at the moment that his aim, it may well become an aim to simply solidify the Donbass area and get broader assurances for Ukraine's non-intervention to satisfy Russian propaganda and the Russian public. But I don't believe that Mr. Putin has made a conscious decision to stop the war against Ukraine. We have the prospect that this could be a very long, multi-year conflict. So therefore, I do think that Ukraine has to seek ways of shortening the conflict. And those, I think, require two directions, two vectors which it should be pressing. One is for battlefield victories and incredible punishment of the Russian occupying forces, aided by ongoing and ever increasing amounts of military equipment that can feed and sustain a country and a fighting force that is deep and is willing to fight. And secondly, at the same time, be prepared to make certain kinds of compromises, or at least gestures, in the direction of Putin, so that Putin is not humiliated by the situation on the ground. And that may well require these forms of compromise that are referred to as non-bloc status or neutrality in the matter of NATO, but not in the matter of the European Union, and basically guarantees that would, at the minimum, protect Ukrainian airspace and give Ukraine the kind of martial and kinetic capabilities that would exact far more pain on a future Russian aggression than were present or are currently present in the Ukrainian military arsenal today. And I think that that is, in a sense, what is being discussed in this idea of security guarantees. Security guarantees are, in effect, a way of negating, if Russia is interested in a settlement, the idea of the demilitarization of Ukraine, because de facto it is a way of ensuring that Ukraine has the requisite amount of force to deter, or at least substantially reduce, the risk of a renewed Russian aggression, or after some kind of a temporary interregnum where Russia reasserts itself. So again, the two dimensions that I think are a component of Ukraine's non-NATO solution, because NATO is not on the cards and NATO is not offering to do very much for Ukraine, as we can see, and many NATO countries are reluctant not only to welcome NATO, but to give Ukraine the kind of vigorous military hardware support that it is asking for. This solution of security guarantees fundamentally by NATO countries, but also ratified and accepted by Russia, which is what I think is meant by the idea that Russia is a guarantor of this agreement. That, it seems to me, to be the workaround that Ukraine is seeking. But the basis for that workaround has to be, in effect, a punishing response to the Russian aggression, because I see no other way of forcing Putin to the table. And I certainly hope that as these discussions are going, that the thus far inadequate flow of additional offensive weapons will change, and we already see some intimation of it. But we want, I believe Ukraine needs aircraft, the air to sea weapon, land to sea weapons, the high range anti-aircraft weapons, additional arrays of tanks and armored personnel carriers, the kinds of things, as well as the anti-tank and anti-aircraft arsenal and drones that currently Ukraine is deploying to great effect. So that's my sort of overall view. NATO is underperforming. I would say only the United Nations is doing worse than NATO in supporting Ukraine among the multilateral institutions. The financial institutions are even doing better, and the G7 is doing better, and those that have imposed the sanctions regimes are doing better than NATO is. So NATO does not offer much hope in this current environment, and that the only way that you bring Putin to the bargaining table is in effect by a punishing response to the current Russian aggression, and even some setbacks for Russia and pushbacks of Russia on Ukrainian terrain. And the second is to offer this kind of a formula that gives Putin some sort of semblance of accomplishment for this, for his misguided intervention.
Right. I might agree that it's one of the fundamentals is to come up with a solution that would somehow make Putin come to the table and find some mutually satisfying solution. On the other hand, all the atrocities that have been already committed under his leadership and upon his instructions suddenly beg a question of, to what extent there is any chance of, proceeding with any sort of communications and dialogue with the aggressor state and with the leadership of the aggressor state. James, do you think that's still on the table, and how feasible that would be to look for solutions that would satisfy both parties to this war?
Sherr, I have to say that I find it extremely bizarre and deeply unsound that we and others, and Ukraine officially, are all discussing a future security system and a regime of future security guarantees at a time when a war is very much in prospect, when a new strategic phase of this war is beginning in Donbass, with an adversary that remains determined to destroy Ukraine's statehood and has given no indication that it isn't. Under these circumstances, the main purpose of negotiations has to be to enable Ukraine to conduct a reconnaissance. That is to say, based on battlefield success, if Ukraine continues to enjoy battlefield success, and I'm not going to assume it will, but based on that success, to negotiate aggressively and see and discern the limits to which Russia is willing to commit itself officially to a set of compromises. Now, there has never been, I defy anyone to name a single security agreement that Russia has concluded with Ukraine that has been upheld. The Budapest Memorandum, the 1997 Interstate Treaty between Ukraine and Russia, the Black Sea Fleet Agreements of 1997, the Treaty on the Azov Sea, the 2010 agreements in Kharkiv with President Yanukovych, all of them were torn up by Russia at a moment of its choosing. So how often does this lesson need to be repeated? Boris Johnson was the only figure to say what is essential. He said Russia must be defeated, and it must be seen to be defeated. And short of making the West, NATO countries, beginning with the United States, a direct participant in hostilities, NATO has to raise its game. The United States especially must raise its game to give Ukraine all the tools it needs. In the first instance, to push Russian forces back to the lines they occupied before the 24th of February. And there cannot be discussion of a ceasefire until then, because I have to ask another question. When has Russia under President Putin acquired territory that has ever been subsequently ceded or handed back? Never. If a ceasefire takes place whilst Russia is still in control of new territory, it is inevitable. Forces will be regrouped and reinforced, and the war will be continued. And it will be from that moment forward. May I remind you that Ukraine lost more forces. There were more Ukrainian military deaths after the Minsk Accords were concluded than before. But because this occurred over a long period of time, most people haven't realized it. They used the EU brokered agreement in South Ossetia was the prelude to efforts to incrementally move the border of Georgia further. You can multiply all of this. So at a minimum, a ceasefire has to be tied to complete withdrawal to the 23 February lines. Sanctions, we cannot even consider removing them until the entire legally recognized territory of Ukraine is restored to Ukraine and its legal borders restored. Otherwise, as Adrian was saying, we are talking about continued war. We are talking about at most a series of armistices which are going to continue the war. As long as the current leadership group and its establishments remain in power in Russia, I regret to say the best we and Ukraine can hope to achieve is an armed peace. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely. I probably also share this stance that it's actually, you know, the military power and the military unity and capacity that can be a game changer in the developments that we've been encountering, not necessarily in this particular war, but throughout the whole history of Russia's aggressive invasions, you know, in the whole region and overseas. Andreas, what would you, how would you comment on the, you know, on the tools that Ukraine could deploy in securing its stable environment and most importantly protected environment from the aggressor?
Yes, I agree with the previous speakers. What we need is a combination of harsher sanctions and heavier weapons in order to get into a situation when Russia wants to negotiate and is ready to make concessions. And one of the I don't know what James and Adrian may think about this. One of the problems here could be that perhaps at some point certain Western or maybe even non-Western countries would be ready to give Ukraine heavier and Western weapons, and then the problem that could emerge is who will operate these weapons, the technicians, the soldiers that then would be necessary, the highly qualified technicians and soldiers that would be then necessary to operate these weapons, if you assuming that you don't have much time to train Ukrainians to do that. Obviously, that is not necessary for the Soviet era or post-Soviet weapons. For instance, the tanks that the Czech Republic is now, and the armored personnel carriers that the Czech Republic is now, or the BMPs so-called, delivering to Ukraine. But I think for actually to really get to some result, we need more modern weapons. You know, I've served myself in a Soviet bloc army, in the National People's Army of the former so-called German Democratic Republic in East Germany. So I know some of these weapons, some of these vehicles from inside. And I can't really imagine that these Soviet era BMPs and BTRs and T-64, 72, something like that, will change much. What you need is more modern equipment, and here the question then would be with the operation of this equipment, and there are historic examples for this solving this sort of problem. An odd one here being, for instance, the Soviet support for North Korea in the Korean War, when the Soviet Union did not only give fighter planes to North Korea, but also when there were also pilots sent, or the so-called Swedish volunteer corps that participated, not in a very prominent role, one has to say, in the Finnish-Soviet War of 1939-1940. Ukraine has already an international legion, and apparently already thousands of NATO citizens, NATO country citizens, are fighting in this legion. But of course, it would have much more salience, and it would be much more important if we could get into this international legion veterans from Western or non-Western armed forces who are able to operate, let's say, a complicated, heavy air defense system, I don't know, Patriot or something like that. And if we then could also get a Patriot system to Ukraine, that could really have an impact on the war. The current legionaries in this international legion, I don't think have much of an impact actually on the war. So I think that would be something to think about. I think also Ukraine needs to think creatively about this. One instrument here could be to make simply these veterans citizens of Ukraine, and give them a Ukrainian passport, and then sort of circumvent this issue of NATO's involvement in this war. So that would be, I think that would be a sort of a somewhat fishy scheme, but if you want to get a really change in the war, I think one has to think about these sort of methods. I don't, if you want to change something quickly, of course, first we need the equipment, and then perhaps also think about who's going to operate that. And then we could get into a situation when security guarantees indeed come into play. They have, of course, a bad name in Ukraine, because this term security guarantees is associated with the Budapest Memorandum, where I think they were actually a misnomer, because the Budapest Memorandum was essentially a non-aggression pact. It wasn't really that that Britain and the US gave actually security guarantees to Ukraine in terms of any sort of protection. They simply promised not to invade Ukraine, which they did not do, and you know, there was no threat of them doing that. So what we need here is other security guarantees, and here the problem is, of course, that NATO cannot give that, and also it will be not easy for NATO member countries to give such security guarantees in terms of actually deploying troops to Ukraine. There are examples for this, this actually happening. The US has given security guarantees to a number of countries that are not members of NATO. The prototypical case here being the South Korean-American Treaty of 1953. And also Turkey has done so with Azerbaijan in a 2010 mutual aid pact that is actually fully ratified military alliance, and moreover, which is an alliance that actually did have an impact in the 2020 Azeri in the Second Karabakh War, when Turkey supported Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan was victorious, at least in sort of partly in this war, and Russia did not help Armenia to the dismay of the Armenians. One reason perhaps being that Azerbaijan was in an official military alliance with a NATO member country, with Turkey. So I would only hope that perhaps also for Ukraine, there could be certain NATO member countries who would go for this. Poland, Turkey, Canada, I don't know, Britain, the US, whoever. But I'm afraid probably not. If one government or a few governments would decide to do so, that would be great, but I'm afraid not. And then the question is how you could sort of actually transform security guarantees into something that's going to help Ukraine. And here, again, this issue of weaponry and also specialists comes in, and sanctions and so on. And this has to be something substantial, otherwise it will not deter Russia. And it will be actually difficult to come up with a scheme that will not involve any troops, foreign troops coming, friendly troops from partner countries coming to Ukraine, but still somehow, providing security. That's going to be the big puzzle, I think, of this scheme. So one was, as I indicate, one would have to think about this very creatively to actually make security guarantees into real, security guarantees, and not some sort of empty promise that then that will not have any consequences. But we are not yet there. I agree with Adrian and James. First, we have to get to some sort of, I would think, at least partial victory, and to default in Russia, and to some real change of the political mood in Moscow, and then we could negotiate something that may be acceptable to both sides. Right.
Andreas, thank you. Zakhar, I want to ask you on, from a perspective of international law, is there, any pitfall or, any kind of downsides or stumbling blocks with respect to the mechanics of operation of such, security guarantee systems? So Andreas has referred to a couple of cases where sort of, similar guarantees have been provided, but could this fundamentally be an answer to Ukraine's, to the Ukraine's case? What would be the legal implications, and the things that would impede, somehow limit the capability of enforcing the security guarantees? How would those states take such obligations on themselves and respond to Ukraine favorably by securing those guarantees? Would there be any liability in case of those states' failure to provide those security guarantees? Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so thank you, Sergey. The matter is that actually I think that we are to differentiate security guarantee agreement and mutual defense agreements in this context. Because when we are talking about security guarantee agreements, it is provision of secure guarantees for Ukraine. But when we are talking about mutual defense agreement, we are talking about mutual cooperation of states in defense sphere. And from political, from legal perspective, these are absolutely different types of agreements and different types of cooperation of states. And you are correct that now Ukraine is seeking for new security guarantee agreement, not mutual defense agreement, because one of the aspects which is discussed is neutral state of Ukraine. And in case of neutral state of Ukraine, it will be impossible for Ukraine to conclude mutual defense agreements, only security guarantee agreements. And that's why it is necessary for Ukraine to receive very strong guarantees of our security in such type of agreement. Because my colleagues already mentioned Budapest Memorandum and our bad experience of Budapest Memorandum, which led to the very serious bad consequences for Ukraine. Because Budapest Memorandum being a legally binding document, there was no real mechanism for implementation of these of security issues which were implemented within the Budapest Memorandum. The only legal obligation of United Kingdom, of United States, in accordance to the Budapest Memorandum, was to raise question within the Security Council. That's all. There was nothing else. Of course, it's not enough. That's why, and having such bad experience, of course, now Ukraine is seeking for much more better security guarantee agreement. By the way, speaking about Budapest Memorandum, I would like to mention one cynical issue. I don't know whether you know about it. Kharkiv was bombed by bombers, which were provided by Ukraine to Russia Federation in implementation of Budapest Memorandum. I'm talking about this Tupolev Tu-22. In NATO classification, it is called as backfires, if I'm not mistaken. So just imagine, our territory was bombed by bombers, which were provided by Ukraine to Russian Federation in implementation of Budapest Memorandum. This is the most cynical explanation of the operation of Budapest Memorandum and treatment of Russian Federation towards Budapest Memorandum. Again, yes, now Ukraine is trying to find out much more serious security guarantee agreement. I also agree that all discussions about this are possible only after the victory or partial victory of Ukraine within the fields, for us to have strong positions for the discussion of these security guarantees. We don't have information about the exact issues which are under discussion now. At least issues which we heard from mass media, it is closing of sky, immediate provision of weapon, and also implementation of preliminary agreed sanctions. So immediate implementation of preliminary agreed sanctions. At least these issues we hear from mass media as points for discussion within this security guarantee. What is interesting that only few states announced that they are ready to provide those guarantees. It was Poland, Germany, Italy, but there was only announcements made by speakers. So it was not an official positions of governments. It was just an announcements of speakers of ministers of foreign affairs or something like that. A couple of days ago, our president mentioned that till now there are no states who are willing to provide guarantees for Ukraine in form which Ukraine is requesting. So this was the issue which was mentioned by our president. I think that this is good. To my mind, this issue is very good. Why? Because it means that we are asking something serious. That we are asking something serious and we are insisting on something serious. And if I'm not mistaken, today there was an information from Germany that there are negotiations between Germany and Ukraine about the security guarantees, but they are confidential, and Chancellor Scholz can't provide any information about this. Again, I think that this is good because we are asking something serious, and negotiation are not very easy about the provision of those guarantees. Speaking about examples, yeah, Andreas mentioned those agreements which were concluded with other states by United States, but again, mostly those agreements are mutual defense agreements concluded with Philippines, with South Korea, with Japan, if I'm not mistaken.
Would those imply reciprocal obligations for states to provide reciprocal assistance in the defense sector, correct?
Yes. So it is. So those agreements are mostly about the mutual cooperations in defense sphere, and of course, those agreements contain provision on the certain issues of security, of help of United States in case of attack of those states. But again, this question is only one of the questions in big issue of mutual defense cooperation of those states. Speaking about Ukraine, again, we are asking now only about this small issue, security guarantees. We are not even asking about defense cooperation. We are asking only about these security guarantees.
Precisely.
As to the options, I think that, and again, my colleagues mentioned about this, that the greatest options for Ukraine is now to have strong defense system. And I think that the best way for Ukraine is to have strong defense system, maybe looking like Israel of defense forces, with huge and very serious reserve forces, which can be applied immediately. And as plus to this security guarantee agreement as optional variant, if those guarantees will not be provided for Ukraine, so for us there is no sense to undertake obligation to be neutral, and we are to seek mutual defense agreement with some other states in this or that forum.
Right, Adrian, what is Washington's stance on the fundamentally on the security guarantees that you could consider to provide to Ukraine, and at what cost, if that's any relevance?
I think that it is very far from being discussed in a serious way. I don't know that there are any serious diplomatic discussions on the way that say parallel what is going on between Germany and what may be going on with Poland about these matters. So I think we're very far off. Right now, the focus in Washington among friends of Ukraine is to provide adequate amounts of financing. For example, a new idea that I think we're seeking to advance is that the seized funds of the Russian central bank be used to fund the Ukrainian war effort, and the whatever is left over be used for the Ukrainian recovery, and that not simply be Western governments funding this, but that just as Russian Tupolevs were used to bomb Kyiv, Russian dollars, hard currency, should be used to bomb Russians. And I think that is, so I think most of the efforts in Washington are at the moment focused on getting our administration to move beyond small increments of additional military aid into massive, categorically different levels of assistance for a broad range of weapons that will deter and potentially defeat Russians on the ground. I mean, I think I agree that the Ukrainians are looking to test the waters for creative solutions that might give Putin something, but in return Ukraine gets something more. And as I understand it, the kinds of security guarantees Ukraine is seeking is the influx of additional weapons and weapon systems and air cover, and nothing else. No boots on the ground. It seems to me that should be an achievable aim, but again, there is an allergy in Washington to any direct confrontation between NATO and the United States and the nuclear power that is Russia, and I think that will remain an obstacle. The question is it possible to have other NATO allies? But I think that without the United States being an integral part of this, I think it's hard for Ukraine to feel comfortable that these security guarantees will be substantial. And the fact that the U.S. is not seriously involved at the moment, and that Ukraine has not made any progress in that direction, nor is there any evidence of a serious discussion in Washington, suggests to me that this is, an idea that is far from realization.
Right, gentlemen. I would probably, if you can add up, please feel free to. I also got a counter comment. If basically this is the case, that now specifically now the game is both on the military and on the diplomatic fronts, but it's actually the military front that our international partners are trying to assist us with. Is that correct then? More likely, you know, to push the game on the military wise, rather than get fully engaged into this development of some proper security system setup, which has been basically repeatedly, you know, in the air, but not materialized yet.
I don't think, Sherr, I don't think it's even as clear as that. What is lacking in this entire discussion at official level, and I do not exclude Ukraine in this, is clarity. If a security guarantee is not a mutual defense agreement, what is it, please? There has been no clarity about it. Adrian mapped out some ideas, which are interesting. But tell me, please, why Russia can be expected to agree to any of that. Of course it won't. It's absolutely out of the question. It will not sign any agreement that does not completely dismantle the entire NATO presence, the whole infrastructure of cooperation, training, everything that has existed since the Ukraine-NATO distinctive partnership was concluded in 1997. This has been significant assistance. When Russia says no NATO, they don't just mean no NATO membership. They mean all of that must go. They mean disarmament by large measure of disarmament by other means. If the United States is not willing to supply Ukraine's armed forces with weapon systems, it has been very clear, is identified very clearly that it needs, which it will operate itself, which they can operate themselves, then how can you suppose that the same United States is going to provide Ukraine with even more tangible forms of assistance, particularly when Russia says no? If a country is unwilling to grant Ukraine meaningful guarantees inside NATO, why would it do it outside NATO? It just does not add up. This is wishful thinking.
Right. I believe Adrian has left, as initially noted. That seems to be quite an issue to the larger spectrum of security framework that's been tested lately, and I think that the pace that Ukraine has established, you know, to the international community with respect to the speed of enforcement and application of security tools that they're on the table has been quite incredible, and pitifully, to an extent, the international community, both within the established institutions, you know, the UN, the NATO alliance, they have been probably falling behind one step toward the Russian the Russian state has been doing, and that's been quite a challenge, I believe, for the Ukrainian government, for the Ukrainian governmental team, to fully engage the international partners and make, you know, in making a fast-paced move, which would be more than sufficient to counteract the aggression of Russia. So, you know, Andreas, do you think that that given the momentum that's been gaining lately with respect to the, you know, scale of atrocities and the practical, it's not inefficiency, but still practical impediments that we have observed in timely application of, you know, power sufficient countermeasures, is there hope for, you know, for more powerful and more resolute counteraction from the United West in support of Ukraine?
Yes, I think there are developments. I mean, I'm observing that I'm currently in Germany, that the support, the emotional support here is very high, and lots of talk of solidarity. We have the Ukrainian flags everywhere. There's a huge movement of hosting Ukrainian refugees. Lots of solidarity and empathy and sympathy and so on. But I think what has been missing a little bit in the sort of discourse that I'm observing from the Ukrainian and pro-Ukrainian representatives is a little bit to sort of decipher what actually this claim means, that the Ukrainians are also defending here the security of Western states, let's say at least of continental West European states, even, if you want to put it in this, because it's an often made claim, but what I would be sort of more demanding here is to actually specify why is it for an ordinary German of actually national or even individual interest to support Ukraine, except for empathy, sympathy, solidarity, and so on. So I think that needs to be better spelled out. I mean, we had now these basic illustrations of what is at stake here with the events around the nuclear power plants in Chernobyl and in Zaporizhia. There's even a video of the shooting on Zaporizhia, on the Zaporizhia power plant. I think that is a good illustration why it's important for us. We have now refugees. There could be many more refugees. We have now in the hundreds of thousands of refugees in Germany. We could get in the millions of refugees, perhaps refugees not only from Russia, but also from other, not only from Ukraine, but also from other East European countries, and in the future also from Africa and Asia, because of the wheat problem, the export of foodstuff that is now being hampered from Ukraine to Africa and Asia, and also from Russia. So this is something that needs to be talked about. This is about our national security. What are we going to do if millions and millions of East Europeans are going to come to Germany? Where are we going to host all of them? Or something that I've been basically already with a colleague at Harvard, Mariana Bujerin, sort of several times publishing about, it's the undermining of the regime for the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons by Russia. The scandalous thing here being of this entire conflict is not only that Russia has nuclear weapons, but that Russia is explicitly allowed to have nuclear weapons by the non-proliferation treaty. And the other scandalous thing here is that Ukraine does not only not have nuclear weapons, but Ukraine is explicitly forbidden to have nuclear weapons by the non-proliferation treaty. And then that puts, of course, the whole logic of the non-proliferation regime on its head, because it now looks as a scheme to prevent non-nuclear weapon states from protecting itself against the rapacious neighbor. And there could be in the future, countries who take their lessons from the Ukrainian experience, also from the Russian experience, and may acquire, they may think, we don't want to be as stupid as the Ukrainians. Instead, we want to be as smart as the Russians. We're going to get nuclear weapons, then we're going to be safe. And then we may even snatch a piece of territory from a neighboring country. So this is something I think that needs to be better spelled out, because otherwise there is what I hear in Ukraine, sometimes this sort of rhetoric about the barbaric East, coming to the West, and Ukraine is in between. That doesn't fly well in Germany, this sort of rhetoric. You have to sort of to make it actually tangible for the ordinary German, or I don't know, Brit or French man to understand what's actually at stake here and why exactly it is important for an ordinary citizen of the European Union.
Right, James. I've seen you probably have some comments with respect to what Andreas has said.
Yes, definitely. As you know, I live in Estonia, and I spend lots of time in Poland. And if this has not been spelled out, it's very interesting to know, because it really is black and white. First, may I remind all of you that Russia's official demands are that NATO withdraw all of its forces deployed east since 1997. Very easy to sit in London or Washington or even in Berlin and say, oh, they know we wouldn't accept that. No, what they knew is we wouldn't accept it today. They mean it. They mean that in the fullness of time, we will be obliged to accept it, or we will be obliged to live with worse. And what will we be living with if Ukraine is defeated? What we will be living with is that Poland, other states now will face the prospect of having a long de facto border with Russia. Poland will no longer enjoy a friendly and secure state to its east. The Baltic states, at least two of them, have significant Russian-speaking populations. Russia officially declares that it has a responsibility to those people, whether they wish, whether they actually call upon Russia to exercise such a responsibility or not. In Estonia, we have gun ownership, and some 1,500 people with Russian passports who refuse to have Estonian passports own guns. There is already a security issue in this part of the world with Russia at many, many levels. This would be a monumental change in the entire geopolitical configuration of Europe, and it would have an immediate impact upon us. And we've not even touched upon the wider impact in the Black Sea region that will arise from this. If Russia is able to establish de facto control over Odessa and part of the northern littoral of the full northern littoral of the Black Sea, which is now Ukrainian. The implications of this for Romania are dire. So I will leave it at that, but thank you, Andreas. We obviously have to do more to spell this out.
I think just to be the devil's advocate, some Germans would say, well, so bad luck for the Estonians or the Polish, but
well, then that's the end of NATO, Andreas. Andreas, that is the end of NATO, and the Russians will be all too delighted.
But then some Germans would say, so what? So we never liked NATO.
I am not, NATO was not created by God on the 9th day of creation.
I think
yes, Zakhar, please.
I think that in Germany, in this context, it is necessary to remember speech, first they came. First they came. The famous speech of Pastor about the German city of Nazi German. First they came. First they came for the trade unions, and nobody protect them. Then they came for somebody else, and nobody protect them. And then they came for me, and there was nobody to protect myself. So the situation is the same. First they came for Ukraine, then they will came for Poland. After that, they will came for Germany. And so,
frankly, I mean, I have to tell you that doesn't fly in Germany. It's sort of,
okay.
You know, the interpretation is this is all this Eastern Europe, post-Soviet, between the different Slavic people. They don't know what, you know,
but
which
Andreas,
territory belongs to where.
I am not making
let it sort them out. I mean, I'm not. This is not my opinion, of course, but that is how people think here. They, you know, let's keep out of that. You know, let's let them sort
Andreas,
of.
Zakhar, I'm talking to you about stated Russian policy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there's any Russian intention to somehow control Germany or come for Germany. If all of these things happen in Europe and this changes, you can forget the realignment of German business interests away from Russia. You can forget any alternative realignment of Europe's energy system, which has already begun. Germany will be a willing pillar of a Russian-dominated system in Europe. And the people you refer to, Andreas, will say, why does it have anything to do with us? What happens in Ukraine will be much, much stronger after there is no Ukraine than if Ukraine is victorious. That's just elementary common sense.
Yeah, I do agree with Andreas that it is necessary to find out approaches for communicating with the society in different European countries to receive much more support of those societies. I do agree about this, and I think that our Minister of Foreign Affairs is very, how to say, innovative in this, especially remembering our ambassador in Germany and his position and his activity. And I hope that they will find out sensitive issues for German society to receive much more support for Ukraine. But I'm sorry, but I also want to add some issue which was mentioned previously about the NATO and role of NATO. I'm sorry that I'm changing direction of our discussion, but the matter is that I have a very strong feeling that I'm witnessing some kind of playing roles. A lot of countries are playing role of, I'm sorry, Russia is playing role of intimidating countries with having no real powers, having no real economic forces, military forces. And other countries are playing role of being afraid of Russian Federation. Especially, I think that we can say this about United States and about NATO. And I think that one of the main, crucial point is to stop being afraid of Russia. Great example. Flights of Russian fighters through the territory of Turkey and flights of Russian fighters through the territory of Poland. In case of Turkey, when Russian flights came from Syria, they were simply shot. And after this, there was no more flights of Russian fighters to Turkey airspace. In case of Poland, there was no reaction. And Russia is continuing to threaten Poland and other countries. That's why I think that very important issue in this point to become like Turkey, not to afraid Russia.
That's quite an interesting point you raised. I think we've got like a couple of minutes left, as you gentlemen are extremely busy, and we much appreciate your time with us today. But I probably would raise like last question on which I would appreciate your very brief comment. So we have all agreed that the international institutions have not been very much helpful lately, and have been more about formalities rather than practical assistance with timely response to the ongoing challenges. I would probably touch base on the United Nations, and we regularly observe the assemblies of the United Nations Security Council. Zakhar, in your opinion, is there any chance that they could have taken any proactive approach and provide within the international law framework the assistance needed, if there is any so allowed under international law?
The greatest problem when we are talking about United Nations is Security Council and veto right of Russian Federation, which actually blocks all attempts to find out any solution for us, for Ukraine, and to stop this aggression.
Can this be tackled anyhow?
I'm sorry?
Can this be tackled anyhow? The veto right of the permanent member?
Several issues are discussed, but those issues, I think that they are almost impossible. I mean, expelling of Russia from United Nations, or expelling from Security Council, or withdrawal of veto right, or something like that. I would like to remind that we have a resolution of General Assembly. If I'm not mistaken, it is called Actions for Peace or something like that, which was adopted in the middle of 20th century. I don't exactly remember the date, but what is interesting, in accordance to this resolution, if activity of Security Council is blocked, and it is impossible to adopt any decisions within the Security Council during on the question of the aggression, the powers of Security Council can be undertaken by General Assembly. The General Assembly may take actions, may adopt resolution to stop aggression and to use actions against those states. This resolution was adopted, but it was never tested within the system of United Nations. And again, application of this resolution is very questionable. Several times Ukraine very softly tried to raise this question, but in all times there was silence. There was no reaction on this attempt. So legally, I think that now there is only this option, very, very weak option.
Andreas, James, your comments on that?
Yeah, I think that these questions have to be raised. I'm afraid, though, this is not something for the near future to be, to get through. I think, once we have these sort of official reports about the human rights violations and humanitarian international law, and then perhaps we even get some decisions by international legal court by courts. Then once we have all this on the table, I think that would be then a good moment. But I'm afraid we won't get through it quickly. I think one issue that needs to be discussed again, that has been of course discussed already many times since 2014, is a UN peacekeeping mission to Ukraine. As a sort of that would be also something where Russia would be on board. That would have to sort of vote in the Security Council on. But again, that will only happen after some sort of at least partial victory by Ukraine. Then Russia will perhaps agree to something like that as a sort of face-saving mechanism.
Sergei, because this is my last comment, let me say what I think is fundamental. What has happened thus far in Ukraine is of monumental importance. The Russian armed forces in many respects have been shown to have feet of clay. There have been deficiencies revealed of a fundamental kind at so many levels: logistics, training, command and control, morale, equipment, old, new, not working as it should. So many people in the West who have been certainly banes on my life, including in many of our intelligences, much of our intelligence assessment machinery, who were saying up until this point, if Russia deploys its armed forces in Ukraine, they will defeat Ukraine's army in 3 days. At least I read in open sources that official analysts in Washington predicted they could take Kyiv in 2 days. Now, what we've seen has completely pulled the rug under this entire way of thinking. The consequences of what has happened here already for Russia are very, very profound. In many respects, I think the Putin system in Russia has been deeply damaged. There are real implications here for the state. We don't even have to speak about Russia's economy. We have a very real chance of securing, in both military and political terms, a clear victory for Ukraine. It has not been achieved, and I don't want to be complacent about it, but it's well within the realm of possibility. And yet, with all of this going on, what we find is that Putin has been doing a better job at deterring us and deterring our responses than we have in deterring him. And my fear, therefore, it's a very real fear, when I see what some allies are willing to consider and not willing to consider, is that we have ample opportunity now to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And I'm very worried about it. So for that reason, I refuse to join in the general self-congratulatory optimism that we find in Europe. In the end, if you understand who Vladimir Putin is, it's not just him, it's all the establishments that are in place with this kind of messianism. This will not stop until either that system or Ukraine itself are destroyed. It will go on. He will not agree to stop it, whatever happens. The more conclusively they can be defeated on the ground in Ukraine, the more we can protect ourselves and have that armed peace I spoke about. But the stakes are very high. They're going to remain high. But I'm very worried that if we get to any kind of peace agreement, no matter how unsound, how infirm, that large number of vested interests in the West, and Andreas knows this as well as I, will tick the box and say, well, that problem is solved. Now we can go back to dealing with something else.
Good. Chairman, Andreas, Zakhar, do you have any last comments for the purpose of, for the sake of good order? Understood. Chairman, thank you so much for today's discussion. I just want to remind to everyone that we've been joined by Andreas Umland, James Sherr, Zakhar, Tropin, and Adrian Karatnycky, who has left earlier. I've totally enjoyed this discussion. It's been very much enlightening, and it's unfolded several interesting things that one may feel free to consider in this whole very complicated issue of the war that Russia has waged on Ukraine. I do very much look forward to ongoing favorable development for Ukraine in this war, and at the same time we well realize and appreciate that it's an extremely complicated matter that's not only premised on international law, but also on practical complications that technically affect the speed and pace of response of the international community. Gentlemen, once again, I thank you very much for your contributions to today's discussion. I also very much look forward to keep in touch with you and to other events that we could host jointly for the purpose of identifying all the quirks and features and naming things what they stand for, and uncovering the complexities that are there on the table with respect to the ongoing war. Thank you very much. Please stay safe and let's keep in touch. And I hope the audience will also appreciate your involvement into today's discussion. We will share this discussion later on social media so that it could be accessible by public.
Thank you. It was nice to participate and to see colleagues, and that everybody is safe. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye.